Muy buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, there are some empty seats here at the front in case you need. There are some empty spaces over here at the corridor because I see some people standing at the back. Hello, welcome, everyone. I'm Valeria Marafi. So let's start today with this presentation. We will be promoting attendance. This is the launch of the Sectoral Education Fund Digital Inclusion 2025, and this is organized by Fundación Ceibal with the support of the National Research and Innovation Agency. We would like to especially thank the authorities here, representatives of international and national agencies, and also researchers and team members of Ceibal. Also, we would like to greet all those connected via streaming from different points in the country and around the world. This is an event that is broadcast both in English and Spanish through the Fundación Ceibal YouTube channel. We have a day of reflection to disseminate the efforts by Fundación Ceibal and ANI and the National Public Education Administration for the construction and development of a research agenda focused on public policies on innovation, education, and technology. The aim, so it is to generate an opportunity for reflection and dialogue for those working on research, teachers, and also decision makers. Today, we're going to have two blocks, first with presentations and panels with authorities and experts, and in the afternoon, we'll be having some exchange tables so that we can go deeper in our ideas for the projects to be presented at the Sectoral Education Fund Digital Inclusion. One more thing that I would like to add. Also, please turn off your cell phones so that the speakers can make their presentations in the best possible conditions. So now we invite you to continue this conversation in social media, X, LinkedIn. This is hashtag attendance promotion 2025. Without further ado, then I'll introduce you to our Gabriela Verde, that is the Deputy Minister of Education and Culture, together with David González, ANI Director, and Fiorella Haim, the President of Fundación Ceibal and Ceibal, so that they can formally open this event. So now, David González, then Director of ANI, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. Congratulations on the organization of this great event. When people think about ANI, in general, the first thing that comes to the mind is education and innovation. But we also play a fundamental role in other areas. But there's this trend of the general public to link ANI with hard sciences. It's not always the case. This is a clear example of that. Also, the final objective of education is to live and to improve society, the society we live in. And for that, we need to think about education and the improvements that we can make. Also, making education so that it reaches all the population and not only some elites. Okay, so in this case, today, attendance is very important for us. There's a lot of room for improvement in our country. So I really think it's a very good idea to focus on attendance. I'm closer to university education, not as much to primary and secondary, but I can tell you that promoting attendance in university has also been affected, especially after the pandemic, and we've had to reinvent the way in which we teach so that we can promote attendance. That is very challenging, and it's even worse to try to do this in secondary education. That's why we believe it's fundamental to look for solutions, to do research, and to make evidence-based decisions so that we can solve this issue. To wrap up, then, I always remember something that happened to me when I was a young man. I was like 25 years old, and something I read by Carl Sagan that said, all children like science. There's something that we do during secondary education that by the end of secondary education, they don't like science anymore. So it's a critical moment in people's lives. So everything that we can do to bring them closer to knowledge, to bring them closer to the value that learning has, that is an option that they have so that they can be a better person. So I really like these kind of events. So thank you very much. Thank you, David Gonzalez. Now, Fiorella Jaime, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Today we are launching the fund and having all these exchanges. It is for us a pleasure to promote this sectoral education fund, to work on attendance together with Annie, a fundamental topic for the country, I could say, a topic that we have been working on with Ceibal, and we believed that we could invite other agencies and organizations from abroad, from the country, so that they can provide solutions to this challenge from different perspectives, from different experts, so that we can add up more information so that we can change the reality we are living in. Ceibal also is this bridge between innovation, education, and research. We work together with ANEP, and we can together implement all these ideas in the classroom in a very short time. So this is highly motivating for researchers, and it's important for them to know and realize that results of this project will be implemented in the classroom and will have a direct impact on the students' and teachers' lives. So now I invite all the researchers community to present the best ideas, to make the most of today's event so that we can fine-tune all the projects that you have in mind. And to really take advantage of this institutional framework that we have in Uruguay with ANI, ANEP, the Ministry of Education and Culture, and also other agencies like UNICEF, IDB, INED, that also contribute to this mission. Also from Ceibal and Fundación Ceibal, we try to gather all these stakeholders and all these contributions and to make something possible out of them so that we can have evidence for public policies and changes in reality. So let's take advantage, make the most of today's presentations to present research studies that can have an impact on reality. And let's have a very fruitful event. Thank you. Thank you, Fiorella Jaime, for your words. Gabriela Verde, then it's your turn. The floor is yours. Hello, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with all these practitioners from different areas of knowledge, friends and colleagues. So, as a teacher, attendance has always been a concern for us. Today we have this possibility of having all these agencies working together so that we can think about this. The Ministry of Education and Culture has as a main goal the democratic access to knowledge For that to happen, we need several factors. First, we need to have an interinstitutional public policy that should be organized and implemented by ANEP, but also all the other agencies from the government. There's a heavy focus on childhood and adolescence, and our goal to provide access to culture and education as a human right, and the fact that we can combine science research cooperation with all this in a way makes all these efforts stronger so that we can have the right data so that we can implement the best public policies. So we're going to be following all the different processes that will be created here. And together with Annie, Ceibal, and other colleagues from ANEP, we will be working together in an interinstitutional way, coordinating all the educational policies, always concerned by the fact that we need to have the right trajectory by students to guarantee access to education and culture. It is fundamental for us to provide all the support required from all the institutions and agencies that are here today in the room. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much. So now let's move on then. So how's it going? So far, so good, right? We are more relaxed. Okay, so now let's move on, because we need to think about challenges and opportunities in topics such as the promotion of attendance. So let's move on to the block that is called Understanding and Reverting School Dropout. That will be moderated by Virginia Robano, that is a researcher working on technology, STEM, and inclusion from Ceibal. And we'll also be having Jess Whitley. So please, Virginia Robano, come to the stage. The floor is yours. Remember that this is being broadcast through YouTube, social media, X, and LinkedIn. And the hashtag is Promoting Attendance 2025. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on the launch of the 11th call for the Sectoral Education Fund. As we mentioned, the theme chosen by Ceibal, Fundación Ceibal, and the National Public Education Administration is the promotion of attendance. How to, in a nutshell, improve the school climate so that being at school is worthwhile, so that our students, their families, teachers, school leadership, have experiences that are motivating, that feel meaningful, and that make them want to return every day. Can you hear me? All right? Okay, so here we have the perspective of the professor, Professor Jess Whitley, has a PhD in educational psychology. Whitley is a professor of inclusive education at the Faculty of Education at the University of Ottawa, where she also serves as a Vice Dean of Research and holds the University Research Chair in School Inclusion, Mental Health, and Attendance. Professor Whitley has extensive experience working with communities to understand and address school attendance and absenteeism. She's the founder of the Canadian School Attendance Partnership, and her research connects mental health with active engagement in school, with a constant focus on the well-being and learning of children and adolescents. Professor Whitley's work helped us move beyond the logic of control to one of meaningful attendance, looking at underlying causes and designing mechanisms that support presence and learning and creating routines that also contribute to building citizenship. It improves the school climate, it improves the school, it improves learning, it improves us all. That is the spirit of the sectoral Fund for Education and Digital Inclusion, and also the heart of Jess Whitley's work. Professor Whitley, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My apologies for having zero ability to speak in Spanish. In the city where I'm from, we speak English, et on parle aussi français. So if there's those among you who have some French abilities, I'd love to exchange with you as well. So hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm so pleased to be able to be here. Thank you so much for the very kind invitation to come. What a dream for a researcher and someone who is really passionate about not just absenteeism and attendance, but the well-being of children and youth. What a privilege to be able to come and hear about the extraordinary work that is happening in the country of Uruguay around education. We've already heard this morning about the incredible partnerships that exist between agencies, which are a bit of a dream for those of us from locations where those close collaborations are still underway. I've learned so much about the passion and culture for innovation here, for excellence in research and in education, and really importantly, I've learned that it is possible to put dulce de leche on everything, not just dessert. So a lot of learning today. I'm going to share a few stories to tell you a bit about how I understand school attendance and absenteeism currently, making reference to what's happening here in the country, but also a really global perspective that I think is really important for us to all understand. I'm going to start off with a very short story about myself. So the university that I work at is on the top right, the University of Ottawa. Like I said, this is a university that is bilingual French and English, and it has a strong mandate to protect the minority language of French. So social justice is important for this university, very research intensive, and I work in the Faculty of Education, where part of my role is preparing the next generation of educators, which I take very seriously. The research that I do there is conducted really in partnership with community agencies. So at the bottom left there, you can see this is a group of multicultural liaison officers. And these are folks who are located within schools, elementary, primary, and secondary schools in Ottawa. And they support immigrant and refugee children, youth, and families, of whom we have many coming to Ottawa. And they support their integration into school. And we have multiple projects running with them right now to learn more about how families from different cultures and backgrounds from all over the world who are coming to Canada, how they understand what it means to be at school, what it means to attend, and what some of the barriers are. So it's this work that we do in collaboration with people like this that allow us to understand much more deeply the impacts and the barriers that exist so that our interventions can be better targeted. On the top left there, I have my two girls, Luna on the right and Marley on the left. They're 10 and 11 now. And so I've also had the opportunity to see and learn about attendance by my efforts to get them to school. I find a lot of this work for people. When I say I work in the field of school attendance, everybody has a story. We heard a story this morning about one of my favorites, Carl Sagan, and science education. Everybody has a story about what it means to be at school, a moment where we felt like we belonged at school, moments where we felt maybe like school was not the place for us. Everyone has a story about attendance and absenteeism. And so the stories of my children and myself and parenting them at school also fits into my work as well. The bottom right is some of the team. So we have many students. That's our little logo on our shirts you can see for the Canadian School Attendance Partnership. And I'm hoping that everybody will check out that website a little bit later after the presentation. I'm going to start off with 3 short stories. Some of these may resonate with you. Some of them may be familiar. Some of them may be very different, and you might say, Jess, that might happen in Canada, but it does not happen here. I'm hoping there might be some points of familiarity for some of you. The first one is Luna. Luna is in grade 4. Since being home during COVID-19, she has struggled to separate from her mother. She gets very upset during the transition to school each day. Some days she complains of a stomach ache or a headache before school, and her mother agrees to keep her home. Some days Mom finally convinces her to go to school and picks her up after the first period. She usually misses a day per week, usually Monday, sometimes 2 days, and is late 2 to 3 times per week. She does pretty well academically, but is starting to fall behind in math, as she often misses the morning when the math instruction period takes place. Her mom regularly takes her to visit family several hours away to give them both a break from the struggles of getting to school. The second one is Marco, and Marco is in grade 7. He has autism and a mild intellectual disability. He is a few grade levels behind in math and language and has modified curricular expectations in these subjects. Marco is very sensitive to loud sounds and crowded environments. His school team can usually manage these needs. Lately, however, there have been changes in staff that work with Marco, and they are less knowledgeable about his triggers. He's had a series of physical outbursts over the week, resulting in his caregiver being called to pick him up. His family have been told that he's not able to return to school presently for safety reasons, and that the next step is a return for 2 hours per day to see if he can manage his behavior. And the last one is Julia. Julia is in grade 10. She lives with her 4 younger siblings and her mother in a small apartment. She's regularly relied upon to get her younger siblings to school while her mother is at work. She works several times per week at the grocery store nearby to earn money to support her family. She's often late for school and misses classes to care for a sick sibling or work extra shifts when they need money for rent or food. Some of her teachers have been understanding of her situation and tried to help her keep up with her studies. Those are the classes she tries to attend. She's growing frustrated at being so far behind when she does show up and doesn't see the value in persisting. Some of her friends have already left school and seem to be doing fine. So those are 3 stories that reflect the realities of students that I see very often in the context in which I work. And I'd love to hear from some of you a bit later about other examples that you see that tell the story of school absenteeism and attendance in your own contexts. I'm going to speak a bit about how we're thinking about attendance and absenteeism in the current landscape of research. So I think historically, if we talked about school attendance, we had this idea that students were either present or they were absent. They were here or they were not here. Not very complicated, quite simple, quite straightforward. What is there to study, right? This is what I hear often. They're either there or they're not there. In fact, what we're starting to think more about is the fact that presence at school actually needs to look much more complicated than the way that we've been thinking about it and the way that we've been measuring it. So if we think about presence, in contrast to this focus on quality education, which I know is in the plans and policies here in Uruguay, also a sustainable development goal coming from the UN. Quality education requires much more than presence, right? It requires in being engaged, being included, mattering, right? Participating, learning. All of these are part of a much more multifaceted picture of being present than we might typically have thought of before. Much more complex, and when we are successful in getting students to school and physically getting them in the door, which for some students and families is a real challenge, it's all of those other pieces that are going to keep them at school and allow them to finish their education and go on to the post-secondary realities that we heard about this morning. So those are pieces that are really key for us in understanding presence. In terms of absence, this is also more complicated than we might imagine, right? So we have this idea of chronic absenteeism, which is a measure that's used here in Uruguay as well as around the world. This idea that 10% or more of missed school days in a year reflects chronic absenteeism, and we should be worried about that. But we also think about other types of absences. What about a student who's missed a couple of days here and a couple of days here? They're not on our radar all of the time, but when we look back at the end of the year, they've actually missed a significant number of days that we think are important. But what do we measure? How do we measure it? How do we communicate it? Those are all questions that we wonder about when we think about being absent. We also have the excused or the unexcused, authorized or unauthorized. Really, historically, we've been focused on absences that are unexcused, where parents did not know that the kids were not at school. And this is historically, we've used the word truancy to think about students who are just skipping school. And now we're starting to think more about all of those other days that are missed, but that are excused. What about the days that are missed for sports or for participation in various events, for holidays, things that we see as very positive, where families are providing opportunities for their children? What about medical needs, significant medical needs that are really strong reasons for students to not be at school? Are those important for us to understand, as well as those that are unexcused? So these are some of the topics that we are grappling with in research, but also in practice and in schools as well. This is some data that many of you will be very familiar with if you've analyzed the PISA data as deeply. Maybe that's just something I do on the weekends, is analyze PISA data, but I know we have many researchers in the room who are very familiar with this. So, and I can see some of you at the back are struggling a bit to see those numbers. So I'll just tell the story of this data a little bit. So what I did was pull out one of the indicators from the PISA data. So this is an assessment that many of you will be familiar with, that's largely completed by students who are 15 years old or who are in grade 8. And most of it is looking at assessment of different academic skills and thinking skills, but they do have some contextual questions, which is one of the only ways we have of being able to look internationally at what's happening in school attendance and absenteeism. So on the PISA, I've put a summary there of the question that's asked. So students themselves are asked how many classes or how many days of school they've skipped in the 2 weeks before the assessment. And it's important to recognize the word skipped there. So they're not asking students how many days have you missed for all kinds of reasons. They're just asking students how many days or classes they've skipped. So again, we see this focus or this belief in the importance of that unexcused absence on the part of PISA and OECD. So I've put Uruguay there, not last for any particular reason. They're just alphabetical, so it doesn't mean anything. And just to give you a sense of, yes, the scope from the student's perspective, the scope of what they're reporting. So that's about, 56% of students said they missed at least a class or a day in the last 2 weeks. I think Canada's sitting at about 41 or 42. The OECD average is pretty low, actually. It's closer to 30. And then I always put Italy on there because they make everybody else feel better about themselves. I don't know what's happening in Italy. If somebody knows, let me know. But they always have the highest rate, so I always put them on there. One of the other metrics that I think is really important, this has come up a lot in my days here so far, is thinking about equity in this work. So one of the other things we can do with the PISA data is to see, well, among that percentage, does it differ depending on student characteristics? So what we can see here in the first one is that there are significant differences for gender, so that girls are reporting missing more classes or days than boys. You can see Canada and Uruguay are actually quite similar in this, in that finding, and we're both higher than the OECD average. Another really interesting finding is with respect to family income. So we would expect that students from lower quartiles or lower income families would have higher rates of absenteeism. This has been found in research for many, many years. This will not surprise anyone here. And we see that with the OECD average. That's what that number entails. But this is much less of a difference in Uruguay than it is compared to Canada or compared to the OECD average. So yes, there are differences, but that's clearly not the whole story here. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. This is data that I just stole from ANEP, so thank you so much for doing all of that work for me. I appreciate it. I won't repeat the beautiful work that they've done. They have incredible reports and webinars and that I've had the pleasure of learning about and listening to. But this just repeats what has been told to me, and so I'm bringing it forward to reinforce this issue that absenteeism continues to play in society. So just to say that there are significant numbers of students here who are missing school, which has already been well reported. If we compare this to the context in which I'm working, if we think about Canada in comparison to this, again, I want to reinforce the point that this is not a problem that is specific to Uruguay in any way. So what I have on the bottom left there is just my own school board. I sit on the board, my children attend there. We have about 77,000 students in the school board. And what you can see there are the chronic absenteeism rates from grade 1 to grade 8. And I didn't put high school on there, but no one here will probably be surprised to know that those rates are higher in high school as well than they are in primary and elementary school. So between 40 up to 50 and then up to 60% of students in my local school board would experience chronic absenteeism. So this is a very familiar story, right? The other point I wanted to make here, we don't have any national data in Canada. We have no centralization. We have no consistency. Education and health are run entirely differently by each of our 10 provinces and territories. Everyone is making up their own thing. So we have no way of saying as a country anything about absenteeism. What we do have are some opportunities where provinces or school boards have shared some of their data by choice. They're not required to do this. There's no federal or national body of education that can require anything. And just again, to give you a snapshot of how bad things can get in Canada, I guess is a bit of that story. The top province is Newfoundland and Labrador. If anybody here has ever been to Newfoundland and Labrador, that would be surprising, but it's a tiny maritime community, generally seen as having far fewer resources than many of the other provinces in the country. And we can see that their chronic absenteeism rates range from 60 to 70% and more as the students get older. A little bit of a better story in a different school board outside of Toronto, and then in Alberta. So these statistics don't matter to you specifically, other than I want to convey that this is a shared issue. This is not an issue that's unique here. some of the ways that we think about school attendance and why students are absent are really important for us all to, I think, be thinking and talking more about. Many of the reasons for students not attending school I summarized in those little examples that I started with Luna, with Marco, with Julia. There are many researchers right now who are trying to come up with ways of thinking about all of the different reasons why students are not at school. The model that we use most in our work was created by David Heine, and he and his colleagues got together and looked at everything that was being written about school attendance and tried to look at some main categories for reasons. And I use these a lot in my work. So the first one is that emotionally based or anxiety-based school avoidance or school refusal. This is extremely common in the areas where I work at, and it comes through a bit in Luna's example, particularly after COVID, where many younger students did have difficulty separating from their families. We also have the familiar concept of truancy, which has a long history of research and of being seen as a choice on the part of the student to not attend. We also have what we call withdrawal. So this is the parent choosing to not send their student. Maybe they are taking them on a wonderful European vacation, or maybe they feel that the school is not providing what their child needs. So that's a parent-motivated reason for absenteeism or non-attendance. And the last one is exclusion. So this is becoming increasingly common in Canada, particularly for students who have different kinds of externalizing behavior or disabilities, where schools are saying, although we are legally required to accept these students, we can't handle this, we don't have the resources or supports, so we're sending the child home, or we're calling home in the middle of the day, or we're saying you can't come to the school right now. So this is becoming more common. This also could include suspensions, expulsions for different reasons. So, this is just one way of looking at this, but we can see how extremely diverse the reasons for absenteeism are. And that's why our solutions also have to be extremely multifaceted and diverse. These are just some of the key factors. I've tried to focus on research that's coming out of Uruguay and out of Latin America there as well. The same kind of influential factors are seen here as they are elsewhere. I won't go through them all, but needless to say, there's many. One of the ones I want to point out is climate, because I think sometimes we forget that climate also includes the educators. It includes the people in the building. So climate is important from the perspective of the student, but climate in the classroom in the school is also really important for those who are working in it and for families as well and how they experience that climate. How's my time? I have 8 minutes. Well, okay, that sounds good. Thank you. My timer keeps going back to 0, so it seems like it's just giving me all the time in the world. The most recent research we have around the best ways to address what I've already said is a complex and significant issue is to think about it in the way that is tiered. So this kind of pyramid approach is extremely common in this research, and it moves from the base of the pyramid, which is the universal work that we should be doing all the time for everybody across our education system. These are like the foundational elements. And I know the educators in the room will probably look at that and say, yeah, that's just like our everyday work. We do a lot of that. That's part of the focus of education. As we move up that pyramid, what we hope or expect is that fewer numbers of students will need more intensive and personalized kinds of supports and services to be able to attend school. What I find, what I'm hearing in many areas where I'm working and traveling, is that although the pyramid in fact suggests that like most kids should only require those universal systems at the bottom. What I find is that the triangle is often being experienced in many jurisdictions as being more like just a big square because there are so many students who are seen as having complex, entrenched absenteeism that we no longer feel in many places like we just have a few students who are going to need something extra or something personalized. We feel really like the numbers are just so staggering that it can feel really, really overwhelming. But this is the idea. And what we know from a lot of the research that's been done is that we do often kind of assume that foundation is strong and we move quickly and put resources into the higher, more intensive services. When in fact, with numbers as high as they are here and that they are in Canada, we really need to spend most of our time thinking about the base or the foundation of the pyramid before we move on to thinking about more complex and high resource intensive services. I've put two examples here on the right that I've heard a lot about this week, which has been wonderful, that are perfect examples of research that's being conducted here at the Fondation CEBAL in conjunction and collaboration with schools and with other agencies to do exactly what we know is necessary at that foundational tier. So kudos, congratulations to those of you who are already doing these things. Those are exactly the kinds of universal, low-cost, awareness level kinds of interventions that are easy to put in place and that can have a profound impact even in the short term. This is the group that I was mentioning earlier. So in recognition of all of the complexities of absenteeism and the limits of any one system to actually address this, researchers that I spend time with in Canada created what we call the Canadian School Attendance Partnership, in English, et en français aussi. And what we've been successful in doing in the past few years, we don't have, I've already mentioned this, nothing is centralized. We don't have any established collaborations in the way that happen here. So what we've done is actually create collaborations with researchers at the university and all of the different systems that exist in education, in mental health, social services, substance use and abuse, all kinds of different services that are serving the needs of the same students who are not attending school, bringing them all together through this partnership. We started with one community partner and the University of Ottawa, and now we have over 25 partners who work in the community, who work alongside families and children, and we also have our 4 local school boards, Francophone and Anglophone, who are all coming together in this work. It is not quick. It is not easy. People have a lot of opinions. They get defensive about the territory on which they work, their expertise. But this is the work that we see as essential in being able to address this complex issue, is that it's done in partnership with all of these different types of resources and agencies. I'm going to end with kind of the big picture view of what we believe so far in the research and in the practice-based work we've done is absolutely key to this work. I think hopefully it's obvious to all of you that absenteeism is not an issue that can be owned by the education system. It can't just be owned by teachers or by educators. And likewise, it can't just be owned by families who are often seen as kind of the barrier to students getting to school. It absolutely needs to be a collaborative of all of these different groups, all of the different perspectives with shared ownership. What I've put across the bottom there are many of the key points that everybody is probably familiar with. These, to me, are the key foundational pieces that will allow this collaborative to actually unfold. What I've heard so much about this weekend, which I'm extremely jealous of, is the first piece. Absenteeism and attendance is one of the only places I see in education where data itself, the collection and sharing of data, is a profound intervention. As soon as you are aware of what's happening with absenteeism and attendance for a student or for a class, as is sometimes the case, or for a school, that itself prompts reflection, prompts change, and is really powerful. Without that, all of the other pieces really don't matter much. I realize I've used time and I won't go through each of them, but I'd be happy to talk about any of them in more detail as we go through the conversation. Thank you so much for your kind attention and for listening, and I look forward to discussing with you more.
Ahí tenés micro para...
You have a mic over there? I know that after this presentation, you wanted to move to the Q&A. Yes, thank you.
Nos ha parecido desde
Fundación Ceibal thought it would be a great opportunity to have someone from the audience benefit from Professor Whitley's experience and ask questions. So while you're thinking, we actually came up with one to kind of break the ice. I'm going to ask the question. I'll wait until she gets the interpretation. I think she's hearing, right? Yeah. So there's one thing that we are dealing with on the side of the foundation. And that's that the community and the system is calling for quick solutions, right?
yes, the political system needs help, needs solution. Entonces, la pregunta.
So my question is this possible? Is there anything we can do to get quick results in order to promote assistance and reduce absenteeism?
I think it's so tempting to look for those quick fixes in education. I've been working in education for 25 years, and I would say that this is always the question that comes is, what can we do today? What can we do tomorrow? I think the work that I've seen here this week shows that there are quite simple interventions, that awareness and sharing of data that I mentioned previously as an example, that can lead to change that is quite, quite rapid. So the examples I was hearing this week about sharing data with parents and families in ways that are very accessible, in ways that then allow them to, even the week later say, okay, we missed 2 days last week, maybe we can aim for one less this week. So there are some ways of collecting and sharing data, I think, that can lead to quite rapid change for some families, right, where that is something that's going to be impactful. For others, like some of those examples that I shared and some of the students that we see in our work, this is going to be years of slow shifting that might involve housing supports. It might involve deep engagement with mental health providers for the student or for their whole family. So I think there are some ways that with some of these layers that we can address what we call in English the low-hanging fruit. I don't know how well that's going to translate. Make change with those who are kind of readier for change, where things are a bit more simple. But then some of those layers are going to be very slow, and that's hard for us in education often. We want to see things move quickly, but some of this is going to be long, slow work as well. So I think it's possible, but it's not going to be a quick fix for most of these students who have really entrenched absenteeism.
Thank you, Professor. Tenemos un par de preguntas del público.
We have a couple of questions from the audience, and then I think we're going to stop because if not, we're going to be delayed with our agenda, okay? We had 2 questions over here, 3, there's a 4th over there. I don't know if we're going to get to the 4th, but, you know, we're playing with time.
First of all, as someone who also spends most of his weekends looking at PISA data, there might be an issue with translation in that particular question.
Okay.
When we say skip and miss, that nuance may be lost in Spanish. I'm guessing it may also be lost in Italian. It might be part of what's going on in Italy.
Okay.
And speaking of translation, my question to you is, how do we translate? To what extent can we translate the Canadian experience into the Uruguayan reality? Your first 2 cases, Luna and Marco, are becoming more common in Uruguay, but I would than in the past. But I would say that Julia is probably still our main issue, which I understand is not necessarily the case in Canada. So what can we really learn? What can we transfer from the Canadian experience into our experience? And what should we try to find out on our own in that sense?
Yeah, and thank you so much for pointing.
Sí, muchas gracias.
I think that's why we need to come together as researchers to understand that, in fact, we may be talking about very different things when we compile data internationally. So that's a great point that you've raised. I think I've really been struck by many of the parallels. I would say that the experience of Julia is extremely prevalent in Canada, depending on the communities that you're in. So I've spent quite a bit of time in a small province called Nova Scotia, right on the coast, which still has fishing as its main industry. And many students that I interviewed there will say that they have lost any sense of the value of education, and they're going to fish and leave high school and fish and make a good living and buy a nice truck. And so what is the point of persisting? They would rather help support their family and leave. It's not the same story in some of the bigger cities, but I will say that is a very common experience for us still. I think that what our Uruguay is already doing in terms of collecting and sharing data, as I've mentioned probably too many times, is a huge strength of what's happening here, as is the interagency collaboration and cooperation that I'm seeing. I will say also that one of the approaches that I'm seeing as quite impactful in Canada right now is the bringing of mental health supports and agencies into schools. This has helped to lessen the stigma, to provide more access to services. The aspect of anxiety has actually come out in, most of the cases that we're seeing of absenteeism. So we really believe strongly that those kinds of resources and supports need to be integrated into anything we're offering in terms of absenteeism and attendance support. And I know that's a bit of a different conversation here, but that's some of what I'm seeing in Canada as being very impactful that I would kind of present as an option for people to think about moving forward. Thank you for the question.
Había una como del medio para allá y después una allá bien en...
There was a question, I think, in the back. Pablo, you're number 3, and you are number 4, if I'm authorized to have 4 questions. Pablo is number 2. I'm sorry. Yeah.
La pregunta es la siguiente.
Thank you very much. I noticed that you were talking about having all of those agencies acting within the education system. But in order to do that, do we need to redesign the education system, or do we have to have that interagency cooperation? Because you were talking about how hard it is to tackle those tasks. So what do we have? Multidisciplinary teams that work together with the teachers to change the climate, or is it the teachers that are working alongside them? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that although a reporter asked me yesterday about why we didn't redesign all of our education systems after COVID, I think that in general, my experience has been that we're trying to shift systems slowly and somewhat painfully to try to reflect a more collaborative future. And so I think if we could start from scratch, that this idea of having community schools where many agencies are co-located would be my vision. But this is not the reality of the systems in which I'm working. So what we're trying to do currently with moderate success is to develop agreements between school boards, which include usually dozens of schools in a region, and then community partners that would have then shared agreements to offer some services within schools or to share data across agencies. But I will say that, as I'm sure is the case in many places, still the strongest partnerships we see are happening because of very passionate individuals who are working against some of these systemic infrastructural barriers to bring people together to co-offer services to students. So it's work that's being done kind of in opposition to structures which were really not created to provide that collaboration. A multidisciplinary team is everybody's dream, I think. We do have some availability of that in our school boards. There are we have psychologists, but not in the schools, right? But there are teams that can travel and support educators. And we have seen those be very powerful and very effective. There are never enough of them. The wait lists are extremely, extremely long. But they do exist, and we see that as absolutely crucial that those interdisciplinary teams are there to support the educators, because this work cannot be done by teachers alone in any way. It needs to be done in collaboration with other professionals. Thank you for the question.
Acá en la segunda fila. Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering if you know, I don't know if there is data over how absenteeism has evolved over, let's say, decades, because there seems to be a point that is often made that kids are not interested in school, and especially teenagers, because it's just old-fashioned. And I wonder how much that's a reason.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday at lunch, and I think the quote that you said was, well, we used to go to school because you were just told to go to school. And that's much less of a convincing argument for teenagers right now than perhaps it was. I'm asked the question a lot about, has absenteeism just kind of emerged as a new issue? And I don't think it has. Some of the longitudinal data we have shows that this has been kind of around for quite some time, but we've typically thought it's just about those students or, it's happening in that place, when in fact I think it has been around. But I do think that when we have done our own work in listening to adolescents in particular, it is a much more difficult conversation to have to convince them of the relevance of what it is we're offering day to day in schools. We are competing with remarkable influencers. We're competing with teachers on TikTok who are much more exciting than most of us are. So I think that it does prompt us to, I think, have to reflect more deeply on, are we clear on the purpose for which children are coming to school? Do we feel like we can make a strong case for the benefits of being in school? It can't just be to learn this part of math, because they could learn it from Khan Academy in 20 minutes themselves, some of them, right? But I think if we are stronger, more convinced of all of the benefits of being at school, of being together at school, of bringing shared perspectives together at school, of learning from a variety of different people, and of seeing the long-term impact. I know there's economists in the room, of thinking about the long-term impact of school completion on somebody's entire life, which is a very difficult thought when you're 14 and your friends are hanging out in the McDonald's parking lot. So I think, I don't think it's a new issue, but I do think we have to perhaps think a bit more deeply about the whys in order to be able to be a bit more convincing in some of our arguments to teenagers in particular. Thank you for the question. You know, they said nobody would ask questions.
Sí.
I feel like I could have just sat here and answered questions.
Gracias, profesora Weasley.
Thank you very much, Professor Whitley. On behalf of the team, we would like to thank you for your effort to try to understand our reality and context and adapt the suggestions made. Thank you.
Dice que tengo gente curiosa.
So there are people that had a lot of questions, so thank you so much. Okay, so now we invite Paulo Caggiani on stage, president of Codicen, Irene Gonzalez, also executive director of Ceibal, because as from this moment now we're going to be working with school absenteeism, something that is very relevant for the system. Do you have a mic? Yes. Okay, so thank you. Good morning, everyone. It was a pleasure listening to you, Professor. Now you have modified all my speech for today, because now I have a lot of new ideas. I believe that taking into account this opportunity where we are launching this sectoral education fund, I was trying to reflect about the reasons for this to be a great opportunity and why researchers really should apply to this fund. I think that the first point was pretty clear, is that in Uruguay we need to reduce those absenteeism numbers. So trying to offer a tool or incentive to coordinate efforts so the academia is aligned with this priority defined by the educational system, I believe it opens up an opportunity. And all this in a context where, if we think about the past and some years ago and what just mentioned, the invisibility of absenteeism, this is a milestone in itself, because we are contributing to this issue to raise awareness about this topic in a context where at Ceibal we have worked in absenteeism from behavioral sciences, and in a way this can help us overcome these barriers. So as parents, as decision makers, it is sometimes hard for us to estimate this. We tend to think that our children in general attend school, but there are many, many situations that go under the radar. So this contributes to the visibility of the issue, to push this topic on the public agenda. And I'm really convinced that, and I like what she presented about the different levels. We know that there are several causes to this problem. This cannot be summarized in only one case. And also, we need to pay attention to the differences in absenteeism if we consider socio-economic factors. So we know that there are several reasons for this, and we know that this happens all over the world. So I really like that approach about thinking on different level interventions, also to take into account the areas in which we need to work. I believe this is an opportunity. We need to be creative and to allocate the right resources in the right places, also to do research on this area. And I do believe that assessment plays a significant role in all this. I read an article a couple of days ago. This article was about an intervention in the US targeting mothers with newborns, where they received financial aid monthly after 4 years and after $20 million that the intervention costed. They couldn't find any relevant results. So basically, we can say that, well, that experience was a waste of money. Well, in fact, that research highlights the importance of having the right policies or well-designed relevance, well-designed interventions. Maybe the money allocated was not enough, but we need to measure things in order to change them. So I believe this is also relevant. Opportunities like this one, events like this ones, trying to generate high quality evidence. And something else that Jess mentioned is like Uruguay is a unique place for these kind of interventions. Basically, having the data, having the GURI system in primary education, where we have real-time feedback on students' absences. So this data is very helpful to us to raise awareness about this, deploying technology also, so that we can get this information in a timely fashion, also to generate interventions. We are using technology to try to reach all the places that we want to reach, also using AI with its own risks and challenges. I believe that here in Uruguay we have a unique context. The other day I was reading an article where they mentioned the relevance of looking for the right causes. There is a moment in which we need to find out the causes for the problems we are working on. I think that the fund, in a way, it's an opportunity to try to get to those causes and find solutions that can prevent these children from being absent at school. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. It's great to have the opportunity of listening to people like Irene. She's an expert from Ceibal. She has worked very, very hard. Education systems, they have this tension when it comes to attendance of younger generations from the beginning of time. And this is connected to the project of society that we have. Basically, the different ways of coexisting, our own values, and not that much connected to attendance. The Uruguayan public school is associated to the fact that you need to attend. In fact, Varela stated that parents not sending their kids to school should be imprisoned. And he suggested this because he identified those challenges. When we see what happens in our agricultural schools in rural areas, in the past, families did not care much about their children attending school because priority was given to family production and working opportunities for those families. What happened at the time is the UTU in Uruguay, our vocational schools, focused basically on production. So in those cases, children could go to UTU schools for several days at a time, and the rest of the days they could spend them with their families working on the farms. Okay, so this is closely connected to the society project that we have. When it comes to knowledge production, attendance is something pretty new as a topic. These concerns about the impact schools were born in the second half of the 20th century. This is pretty new here. So I believe that nowadays we are producing more and more information and more evidence about this topic, and we know it is a very complex issue. Also, this is just one of the few policies that have daily impacts on the lives of thousands of children in Uruguay. And because of this, it is a concern for us. Because we believe there's room for improvement, especially when protecting children's rights. And because of this, we have focused our attention on this issue, because we need to find a way of improving the situation. Spoiler alert, we are not improving anything if we keep doing the same thing. This covers the way in which we record absences. It's also connected to policies, the environment, social protection, health, mental health. The way to school, everything, all these factors contribute to this situation. There are many other policies that have an impact on attendance. And these are independent of what we can do as a society or as a family. If the children need to cross a river, well, that's a reality, okay? That makes everything harder. And those are things that we also need to take into account. We say this because this involves many other areas of society. So having a safe way to school that is something that we need to guarantee. Well, for some children, this is an everyday problem. Of course, that they need to go to school every day because it's beneficial for their learning, of course. But apart from that, education can mobilize other policies connected to the everyday life of children and their families. That is also connected to the society project that we have that involves that the cities should be designed for everyone. It should be a safe place, that we should provide access to health, public transportation, heating systems. Basically, so talking about attendance is talking about the children's everyday lives. So that's why I believe this is a very interesting opportunity to generate information, generate evidence, knowing, of course, as the professor mentioned, or as Irene mentions, that these changes are very, very little. Is 1 percentage point, 2 percentage points, and maybe this can be just a little progress, but for those of us that work in education, these are big, big changes. So I would like to invite you all to apply to the fund to generate information and evidence, because in this administration, we are really, really willing to hear you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on now to the next stage, and let's see some practical opportunities connected to research and innovation. This will be moderated by Claudia Broveto, that is the education manager at Ceibal. Claudia, please come to stage. Claudia won't be on her own. We also have Irina Sanchez, the management of behavioral sciences, also Juanita Bloomfield, that is a research teacher at the University of Montevideo, Martín Pasturino, president of the Education Assessment Board, INED, Alejandro Retamoso, also working at UNICEF Uruguay. Unfortunately, Santiago Cardoso, coordinator of the Research and Statistics Department at ANEP, couldn't make it today. But instead of Santiago will be with us in the afternoon. Okay. Also, please remember that this event is being broadcast both in English and in Spanish through the Fundación Ceibal channel. Also, you can join us through social media, X and LinkedIn, through the hashtag promoting attendance 2025. So now all the speakers are in place, so now let's welcome them. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank our panelists for being here today, and also Fundación Ceibal and Ceibal for organizing this event. We have a great panel, as you can see. And I think we will be able to get different perspectives from different agencies. I believe that the previous speakers, both Irene, Pablo, and as well as our keynote speaker and Virginia, in a way, presented this conceptual framework on how to understand this issue of attendance and absenteeism with several causes. That is not only about being physically present, even though being physically present is a necessary condition for all this, but clearly that's not enough. And I believe that this panel, in a way, can help us showing the different approaches, both from institutions and practitioners, and we may go deeper in some of the causes mentioned, and also some examples of specific interventions or studies that may encourage researchers to apply to this fund. So thank you very much for being here. So I would like to start with Alejandro. Alejandro, well, here we have mentioned the fact that in Uruguay we have a lot of data, open data, in fact. Do you believe that this issue has been diagnosed in the right way in Uruguay so that we can implement public policies in the country? I know that from UNICEF, you've carried out qualitative studies connected to behavioral factors where you get information from families, students, and teachers. So I would like to know your opinion about that. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Absenteeism in our education system and what happens after the pandemic are clear evidence of diagnosis still being necessary. Not to describe the phenomenon, not only for that, but also to try to find out about the causes and the impact that this has on the life of children and adolescents. So I believe that this is still valid. So diagnosis is something very, very positive, and it allows us to continue working on this. When Pablo mentioned that this is quite a recent issue, and I think it's true, I agree with that. And taking into account that we have so many researchers here, I would like to share some of the previous experiences on this topic. I have identified so far 3 different ways of research connected to this topic. One that started in 2000 and that was connected to the mandatory attendance for 5-year-old students. And at that level, researchers started studying the absenteeism phenomenon. We have some studies by Lichtenstein and Kasterman about the social aspects of absenteeism. 8-9 years later, and connected to H1N1 flu, we also had a several group of studies, one organized by UNICEF, and these were qualitative studies, and also a pretty strong study in primary and secondary education by Mancebo, Zaffaroni, and Chambi that study the factors for absenteeism, also in primary. And then there's a third wave after the pandemic that is connected to primary education, as what ANEP and Ceibal did, and then secondary education. Why is it that we have different waves? I think that is very positive, because we need to get used to having these kinds of research waves. And it's clear that you need to attend to learn. And then I'll stop here, and then later I will tell you more about behavioral factors and family attitudes that have an impact on these factors. Okay, great, Alejandro. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so yeah, we can continue later on this topic. Then Irina Sanchez. Irina works here at Ceibal. At Ceibal, we have a tradition of interventions in this area. And we would like to know more about this so that you can tell us a little bit more about this and share this information with the researcher community. Which have been the more impactful interventions to improve attendance? And I also requested Irina to mention some interventions that did not have the expected impact, because of course we also learn from failures or things that do not work as expected. Okay, yeah, perfect. And thank you, Claudia, for the question. I would like to thank everyone for being here. I would like to start by reinforcing that concept shared by Jess on the fact that absenteeism is a very complex topic with several causes, and we need to have different approaches or different kinds of simultaneous intervention. Recent literature is consistent about this. They recommend working as a triangle in base interventions. They have a preventive approach, other interventions that function as an alert for this, for those cases where can identify some kind of pattern that may become an indicator for absenteeism, and then more specific interventions that can be implemented for those few cases where we need to have a stronger intervention, a more focused intervention. From Ceibal, we have been working on this, as Jess mentioned, in some interventions that may be connected to the first or second layer of this triangle. And as from 2022, we have been trying to understand this phenomenon. There's a lot of literature about that, of previous waves that allowed us to understand this phenomenon, especially after the pandemic. Also being aware that this is it's not very different from what happened in the past. And then based on that exploration, we wanted to contribute from the behavioral sciences in this regard. In 2023, we implemented a pilot program of an intervention that wanted to push this topic on the public agenda and also to find out about the number of absences by students and how this was perceived by the families. Because one of the things that we noted in this exploration is that the level of absenteeism of their children was not very clear to their parents or teachers. So the intervention was connected to that, to provide information so that families can have in the top of their minds the number of absences of their children, so that when, at the moment of decision making, when they had to decide to take the kids to school or not, they were aware of the total number of absences of their children. And this project resulted to be a very good experience for the Behavioral Sciences Department.
And we got many conclusions and lessons learned. First and foremost, the intervention actually worked. It actually was able to reduce the absenteeism of the population that participated. In the general population, we had in fact around 6%, and among our target population that had absenteeism patterns that we realized could benefit from this intervention, we had an even higher effect. And apart from that, we came up with other interesting conclusions that I want to take advantage of the space to share. Now, once we shared the information, we did it through physical letters. We shared the information through physical letters with the family, and we were able to develop this intervention providing individualized information based on the very solid data that we had about absenteeism and attendance. But at the same time, we also depended on having the addresses of each household to provide the families with the data. And that data, of course, about the addresses wasn't that precise because families moved quite frequently. So at that time, it was necessary for us to have a protocol established to deliver those letters. So in an agreement with all the education centers that were part of this pilot project, we set up a plan. So if the letter couldn't be delivered to an address because the address was no longer in existence or the family didn't live there, it went back to the education center, and the education center did everything possible to deliver the letter to the family. And that was key. Our work with those education centers was key. And that goes to show how important it is to carry out interventions in agreement and in cooperation with the education centers, which are the main stakeholders that are working with students and families. Because in those schools in which the letter was understood as a complementary intervention to the activities carried out by the education center, we were able to see that the intervention was more successful. Now, at the national level, we don't have many more activities that actually assess interventions and their possible impact on absenteeism. At the international level, we do note that there are similar interventions to the one that we mentioned. In Brazil, there was one where the information was delivered via text message rather than through letters. Specifically, it happened during the pandemic so that the students felt close to the education center regardless of not attending it physically. And there are, of course, other classic interventions such as tutoring experiences that might be a bit more costly, that are a bit more closer to the top of the pyramid, but they still have interesting effects. And then you were asking about the things that perhaps didn't work. And when Claudia asked me to talk about this, I felt it was a challenge because I don't know that much about it. We don't find that much evidence about it. I know that there's a bias in our publications for sure. But I did want to mention 2 lines of our work that might seem obvious, but there's evidence shows that it really doesn't work. The approaches that seek to blame students for not going to school seem to have less effect on attendance, which I think is something that we could expect. But there's also evidence that shows that those initiatives that seek to award students for attending school and having a good attendance record are not always that efficient. And research shows clear reasons why these interventions seem not to work. Because when the behavior seems to be too demanding, perhaps not all of the students want to engage in them. So if I am sometimes absent because of different reasons, I will say, okay, this is not an award for me, so I'm not going to make an effort. I mean, it might work on those students that are not that chronically entrenched in absenteeism, but at the same, there might be a glass ceiling for them because there's little room for improvement in those cases. And another thing that the authors noticed is that in these interventions, when you're setting up an intervention that it's an award, there is this idea that awards are granted to very few people because there are very few people that will reach those levels. So they feel that they won't reach those levels, so why even try? And I really like this example because evidence really shows something that might seem counterintuitive. And it also shows how necessary it is for us to assess the interventions because it actually feeds into decision-making processes and into the different practices that education centers might have. And I think that the fund is an excellent opportunity for us to assess interventions, see what works, see what doesn't, and try and understand what is more worthwhile for us. That's great, Irina. Thank you very much. Thank you for trying to share those experiences with us. Now, I would like to move on to another topic, which I think is a bit hard to tackle, which is the relationship between absentee students and absentee teachers. Of course, we're talking about different phenomena, but perhaps there might be connected in a way that is worthwhile to understand. Martin Pastorino has conducted research on this area, and I asked him if I could ask this question to him actually. Yesterday, Jess and I were having a conversation about the fact that research doesn't necessarily focus on this topic that much because indeed it's a delicate, sensitive topic because we of course don't want to blame teachers and say because you are absent then you're modeling a behavior of being absent to your students, and that's not the case. We know that the topic is far more complex than that, and we're trying to find causes in a very different negative way. But of course, absentee teachers are a reality and the phenomena hurts. So thank you, Martin, for deciding to answer this question for us. No, thank you for inviting me. On the side of the INEP, we have conducted several research on this, one on primary education and the other on middle school and high school, which I believe are very interesting, especially in terms of absentee students. The last one we published actually has a tool that enables us to predict which are the students that will be dropping out of school in the first 3 months of the school year with a precision of up to 85%. Now, we know that after the pandemic, students skipping class or missing class increased by twofold, actually. And I conducted research for the OPP and the Ministry of Education and Culture that showed that between 1997 and 2002, we moved from having 100,000 lessons not taught by teachers to 400,000. I mean, the data is in that analysis that we carried out. And then in 2008, we had 500,000 classes that were not taught in primary school and close to 5 million in secondary school. So when we are talking about absentee students, parents come to us and say, yes, but actually my son or my daughter goes to school. The problem is the teacher wasn't there. The one from the first period or the second period wasn't there. They had free periods. They are roaming the streets. They get home early. So we're dealing with a very complex issue that actually has an impact on the stability of the education center. Students should know that they get into school at one time and they leave at another time. Leaving early, especially in middle school, is a problem, especially in the poorer areas of town. So when we're talking about absentee teachers, over half of the reasons why they're absent has to do with our national education system itself, because they have to go to teacher meetings, because they have to go to training. So close to half of those cases where the teachers are absent have to do with our own system. Of course, then we have issues with sickness or with strikes. But the important thing here is that this has increased significantly. It leads to lack of stability within the education center. And what's happening is that also has an impact on the perception that students have on how important it is to be in class or to go to class. Now, when we're looking at the education centers in the poorer areas of our country, absenteeism increases among students and among teachers. In school, of course, we've got teachers who perhaps don't have that many years of experience. And because of our education system, they have to teach in more vulnerable areas of the country. And as a result, absenteeism among them also increases. So, in a way, what happens is that those that have very little will get even less, and those that have more will get more. That's the effect. It's what Matthew said in the Bible, right? So I wanted to bring this up because I think we need to have a broader perspective on the situation. Because I think the way in which our agency works and our establishment works also leads to absenteeism among the teachers. And there's another thing that I want to bring up that has to do with absences among students and how that has an impact on them actually being kicked out of the education system altogether. Thank you, Martin. That's great. We'll go back to that topic then in the second round. Let's go to Juanita now. Thank you, Juanita, for being in this panel as well. And thank you for sharing with us the perspective of academia and from universities. And perhaps I would like to move more towards interventions connected to technology because, we're here in Ceibal. And if we don't talk about technology, why are we here in the first place? So I know that the University of Montevideo has carried out interventions integrating the work with families through the use of technologies. So could you tell us about the preliminary results of those interventions and research that you've conducted? What are the doors that you think are opening to new investigations? Well, thank you. Thank you for your invitation and thank you for your question. The University of Montevideo has been working on multiple programs together with families in order to foster guidelines for positive education. We're not necessarily working on the problem of having students being absent, but we are working on the family environment and the family context, which also will have a positive impact on them being in attendance. We did this through randomized trials. We conducted interventions that sought to combine the human side with technology so that those interventions could be scalable. We know that interventions are very effective when we carry them out through parents, normally by doing home visits. But of course, doing home visits is quite costly, so it is very hard for us to actually carry out those interventions among a larger scope. So some initiatives at the global level arose to use technology in a way to reach families in a more cost-effective way. So we started piloting this in CAIF centers in Uruguay together with Ana Balsa and Alejandro Cid by carrying out an intervention using text messages, an intervention that is based on behavior science. So basically, the intervention used text messages to provide information to families, suggest activities that they could conduct at home, and provide them with motivational messages that had to do with self-care for the parents. So we were talking about guidelines to improve the context in which those students lived. So it sought to increase the quality in the way in which parents communicated with their children and improve the way in which parents interacted with their children, or caretakers interacted with children in general. Now, this is an experience that we carried out in the CAIF in coordination with the Timely Experiences workshop. So they had the workshop first, and then we had the text messages. Then we replicated the experience during the pandemic. Of course, we couldn't have a face-to-face workshop, so we only intervened via text messages, and we noticed that we didn't have such a powerful impact in that area. And we believe that the reason behind these results has to do with the human component, as Irina was saying. I mean, we can't just use technology. I mean, the human side of things in terms of providing personal support is what really kicks off these interventions and make them have a broader impact. So we also carried out an intervention together with the Social Development Ministry by having text messages and calls from teleoperators. And this particular intervention provided guidelines on how to take care of children. It also worked on communication, and we also saw great impacts with that intervention, which again, we believe were so great because we combined the human factor with the technology. We actually saw that there was an impact on parent engagement, as well as a decrease in parent stress and an improvement in their mental health. In this new intervention, we also incorporated AI tools, which I believe are highly relevant nowadays. We are providing customized interventions to parents. First, we ask them to share information with us via a WhatsApp audio. The caretaker actually had to share an audio, a WhatsApp audio of a conversation with them, with their children, where we could get information using AI about the speech patterns of the child, the tone of voice, and then we provided those parents with customized feedback based on that audio, showing what was the progress in the communication with the child. So that was innovative. We are also using some chatbots. We tried this out in this intervention and another with healthcare providers, and the use of these chatbots is something that for us has enormous potential because it's providing families with constant support. It's a 24/7 support to get answers to their questions, to get constant information, to have access to the messages that they've received. So the use of chatbots to provide feedback as well as the use of AI, I think, show a lot of promise, regardless of what we see in the impact reports, but we also see it in the satisfaction surveys that we carry out amongst the families. Actually, the families like these kinds of programs. They like getting those messages. They want this program to continue and keep moving forward. So we believe that these kinds of tools and interactions have an impact, and they are valued by families. And there's one last thing that I wanted to mention, by the way, which is about another piece of research that we're carrying out, but in this case in Mexico, that I think connects to this topic that we were talking about, because it's an intervention that we are carrying out amongst students in kindergarten to improve their reading and writing skills among children between the ages of 5 and 6. It's a cell phone app that they can use to play throughout the year. They work on the different letters of the alphabet, and once they have completed an X amount of that program, they are expected to actually have improved in reading and writing. So I think tailoring learning, as it's done here in this app, in which children are learning at their own pace, is very beneficial. We need to customize the learning process for each child by using these technologies and AI. I believe by doing that, we will actually see an increase in motivation, a higher desire to go to school, and thus prevent these kinds of issues that have to do with absenteeism. I mean, I think these things go hand in hand, and all of these initiatives at the end of the day tackle the same issue. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. What you're saying here actually leads me to ask another question. I mean, we only have 8 minutes and counting, but at least we can do a last round of questions. Now, this might be a personal impression of mine or a bias that I have. I mean, we know that absenteeism actually is a multifaceted problem, right? But it would appear that the academic factors are more prevalent in the discourse. You know, people talk about school climate, safety, social factors, mental health, environmental factors. And maybe we're not talking that much about strictly academic matters or about the proposal of a school. I mean, Jess actually spoke about that to a certain extent, you know? We need to talk about what is happening inside schools, especially in the context of Uruguay, in which we are in a transition of changing the curriculum. I know that this might not necessarily be your specialty, but perhaps if you would like to make a comment about this, I think it'll be great. And if you don't want to make a comment about this, you might want to make a comment about something else, which is in a minute and 10 seconds, perhaps. Could you share a message with the researchers in terms of where they should place a focus? Like, if you were a researcher that is about to present a project, what would be the question that you would be asking yourself? Okay, let me take the microphone first. I think it's great for us to separate the external factors from the system from the internal factors of the system. You know, the literature actually isolates them. Now, if we think about what does academia think about absenteeism? We know that families are external factors. You know, there is a disconnect between the family and the institution. There is a significant disconnect that has to do with the education proposal. There is a dissociation between what the education system offers and what students want, and I think that changes their motivation to study. But there's also a disconnect in terms of being close to students, you know. Many times, head teachers don't know whether or not the student is there or at what time they should be in school. So out of the aspects that we have been studying, that's an aspect that I think is important and worthwhile for us to mention. Now, there is another factor that has to do with a low percentage of perception in terms of the value of education. I mean, there is a low percentage of students that feel gratified by student and they don't see the value in education. And that has to do, I think, with the fact that many times families cannot actually accompany students in their learning processes. And this all comes from a qualitative study that we will probably be sharing next month. And it has to do with a low percentage in the value of education, challenges to support students, obstacles to establish limits and routines. Families feel the pain of not being able to establish limits and boundaries, like when can students go to sleep, at what time, and get the routine of waking up early. Another thing that CEIWAL really works on, which is the positive bias. So families have this positive bias saying that actually, no, my child doesn't skip classes that much, others do. And I think that the education system also needs to operate on that. And then there's something that Pablo was saying, which has to do with a permanent concern about peers. And I think based on these 6 elements, I think we can come up with many hypotheses. And because this is multifaceted as a problem, I think we need to try to build a change theory. But in order for us to do that, I think researchers should focus more on this aspect. Yes, I agree. Hi. First and foremost, absenteeism among students is is large amongst kindergarten students, but of course they have different regulations. They don't have to pass or fail. I mean, there are many reasons why families don't take children to kindergarten, but for many reasons. And an important reason has to do with the fact that more women are working. Now, in primary school, we see this ladder that keeps going up and up and up. And what we see is that there is a constant increase in absenteeism. So not only has it been increasing since 2002, but then we got the tsunami of COVID. We thought we were going to see a drop in absenteeism, but that didn't happen. It was sustained. The problem is for us to mix that with how many people remain within the education system. Because in a way, we have a ladder that begins from a phenomenon that is an oxymoron, actually, which is to be present or to be absent. To be present but be absent at the same time. There are those that are there but are not there. After that, we got the latecomers, and then we got chronic absenteeism. That's a ladder. And then they actually fail the grade, and even if they're there, they keep on becoming more and more absent until eventually they drop out. And Uruguay has one of the biggest problems in early dropouts. If you look at Chile, students remain more time within the system, actually. And I think those that are putting research in this area have to also look at that, you know? It's like imagine it's like a tube, right? That has liquid in it. In the center, the water moves quickly, and on the sides, it moves very slow until it drops altogether. And that's the phenomena that we need to tackle if we want to fix this.
I believe that absenteeism is part of that complex process where school disconnects from several areas. Yeah, I can continue with what you have just said and a message to researchers. I believe that this is an opportunity, a huge opportunity for research teams, because it may happen that in some cases you generate knowledge and you don't see the clear impact of this on a specific policy or program. It doesn't always happen, of course, but the fact that Ceibal, ANEP, and Fundación Ceibal and several agencies are opening this opportunity to generate evidence for decision making, I believe it transforms all this into a unique opportunity. So I encourage you all to apply, and you should know that this will be assessed, and of course it's going to be of great value. Okay, so connected to the first question, I agree with Alejandro on the importance of having a good diagnosis of this to get to know the causes and to understand the theory of change, and also to use that as a trigger or as a motivation for interventions, to identify the different barriers, the mechanisms in play, so that we can generate interventions addressing these issues. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Very good panel. Thank you. Okay, great exchange then. So now let's move on to the official launch of this 2025 call. Stephanie Cotto from the Research and Training area from ANI, and Julia Perez, Chief of Innovation and Studies from Ceibal. And please join me in a round of applause. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you very much for having me. The Sexual Education Fund in its digital inclusion area was created in 2015 between ANI and Fundación Ceibal. And from that moment, we've had annual openings. Today, I will tell you about some formal aspects of this call for this year. The fund will open on September the 15th and will remain open until October the 16th, 2 p.m. This fund has two modes, A and B. A is for research projects with specific interventions in the field, and B, proposal B, is for research projects that generate knowledge in the area of education and technology. As you know, the priority line today, this year, is promoting attendance. All these projects should address at least one of the cross-cutting topics. These are 16 different topics. They are available in the Annex 1 of the terms of the call. And I wanted you to know that these topics include causes for absenteeism, impacts on learning, and also cross-cutting factors. And the idea is that these projects comprehensively address this topic. So beneficiaries can be researchers and research teams that work in national or international agencies. It can be from the public or private sector. Something relevant to note is that those responsible or in charge of the project will have to work for at least 10 hours a week to this research project, and all projects should be presented by an institution. This can be national or international, but if it is an international agency, then you should have a national counterpart. Regarding funding, we fund up to 80% of the maximum amount. Maximum amount is 2,900,000 pesos, and all projects should have a counterpart of 20%, and that should be provided by the association that benefited from the project. Duration could be 12 months from Mode A and 18 months for Type B projects. You can apply through the ANI website, where the application form will be available. On the totems, you will have a QR code that you can scan and then have access to the application form. Okay, so we encourage you all to apply. Remember, this opens at September the 15th and closes on October 16th at 2 p.m. Also, I would like to remind you that on October the 2nd, we will be having a webinar where you can ask all the questions that you may have. And if you have any questions or comments, please, you can send a message to fced@ani.org.uy. Thank you. Okay, I would like to tell you then that we know that bibliography says that attending strengthens the educational trajectories of students. It reduces the risks of students repeating their courses, that absenteeism is an important problem in Uruguay, historically speaking, and that has worsened in the last years. After the pandemic, we have an increase in the absenteeism rate. We know that authorities are working on this, and they are thinking about different strategies and initiatives to address this issue. So within this context is that together with Ceibal and ANEP, Fundación Ceibal and ANI have focused on this specific topic. And I believe that that is relevant because projects have the opportunity of working on a topic that is on the public agenda and that they have a possibility to impact these policies, a unique opportunity. Because of that, the fund this year only focuses on one specific topic, but we believe that this topic can be addressed from different perspectives. The fact of it being only one topic, it doesn't mean that we can have only one approach to it. And on this topic, regardless of the different modes of working and approach in this topic, we have seen that there are several theoretical approaches to all this. So we can think of approaches focusing on causes, like Irene mentioned, or we can focus on more structural socioeconomic causes. Others are more cultural, the role to be played by the family and the role that education has for each family. We can think about institutional causes, how this is connected to teacher absenteeism, how it is connected to group sizes, to what's happening to pedagogical approaches in the classroom. We can also think we can approach this from other areas, thinking about perceptions, interpretations. What about the connection between students and schools? Where are those students that are not in school? Where are they? Are they working? Are they providing care? Are these missing students in the neighborhood? And then finally, we can also have an approach based on interventions, innovation. And this is the area in which technology can play a role, presenting different kinds of devices that are attractive and appealing to creativity. Even if we get small changes. So I just wanted to invite you all to apply to these funds so that we can have researchers from all different areas, because since we have only one topic, it can be addressed from different perspectives. Okay, so Julio and Stephanie, thank you very much. So we are closing, almost getting to the final part of this event. Remember that you have the social media, X and LinkedIn, and this last part. And since we mentioned AI, so now let's invite to talk about AI and absenteeism from Ceibal's approach. We can invite Mauro Carvalho to the stage. He's the manager of AI and education. Thank you.
Perfecto. Bueno, siento que quedé solo acá arriba.
Okay, perfect. Well, here I am on my own on the stage. It's difficult to be always in the last section because I don't want to repeat all the things that have been mentioned so far, but a message that I think it's relevant to provide framework to what we are doing on AI. So I would like to once again invite all the candidates to apply to this fund. People mentioned that there are several causes to this issue, and the approach should be in the same fashion. So from Ceibal, we believe that AI is one of the many approaches that we can have to address this topic that has been classified as a specific policy for this administration. And if we think about this, everything started in March when the president of Ceibal and the president of the Republic announced the Edoraya Lab, that basically it's an umbrella term that includes all the different activities and proposals that we have been working connected to AI. And here we have 3 areas of work. The first area is one that we started several years ago, and it has to do with literacy, both at student level, connected to computational thinking and IT, but also on how we have been addressing this issue in the different programs implemented in Ceibal and ANEP. In this case, we have a clear teacher training policy where we have a postgraduate degree with several workshops and courses. The second area is connected about our conception of AI and how to use AI in Ceibal's operations and how to share this with ANEP and other agencies. We have a very good project that is about mentoring teachers and also working with teacher training so that we can share all the things learned in these courses. We believe that AI is an opportunity to increase efficiency that allows us to reinvest those resources to better work with areas such as absenteeism. And the last area, the last one is connected to addressing absenteeism as a country policy. And for that, we have three main items. And this shows how we are working in Ceibal on this. And these are activities that have been planned for this year and 2026.
Incorporemos también la mirada.
So that we can add all the approaches and the approaches from all these proposals that will apply to the fund. So the three areas I mentioned, they are connected to planning and working with teachers. That is what we are currently doing. We need to continue working on predictive models that have been used for a long time by Ceibal and ANEP. We need to continue working on those in that area. An example of this is to work on those areas where we believe AI can have a direct or indirect impact. For instance, when providing planning tools for teachers, we're working together with ANEP to implement different pilot programs connected to these tools. Also, more than a half ago, we are generating content for the classroom. This is already available to all teachers. Basically, this is about analysis, learning, drawing conclusions, and continue learning on the ways teachers implement these activities. And also being very honest, identifying those areas in where we cannot contribute. We know about the limits of AI and the role to be played by Ceibal. I invite you all to visit our website. There's a lot of information connected to this, and there's a manifest that is connected to several areas of Ceibal. And I can see my colleagues here that worked very hard on this. We have identified 7 points that are really relevant to this discussion. Is AI focus on people for an ethical and responsible use of AI? And that is our approach. Going back to planning and working with teachers, we also work on brainstorming tools. And we open these calls so that we can have also external actors that share their approaches. We want to use tools, for instance, that can work on Acredita tests. The second unit of work is connected to working together with students, 360 work. And right now we have more questions than answers in that regard.
Investigación.
Even though there's a lot of research in absenteeism, but from the perspective of AI, research is way more limited. So we need to discuss about the role to be played by Ceibal, trying to promote or find the right technologies as a vehicle to address absenteeism. Okay. Also, we believe that this is crucial, very important, and also a pretty sensitive topic. And we need to decide how much we want to work with the teachers, how much we want to have an impact on classroom work. We are implementing several pilot programs because we want to do some assessment before implementing some changes. We want to make of this a country policy or a tool available for everyone. The other unit of work has to do with the customization of the classroom. That includes the education system in general. When I say customizing the classroom, this is about finding the right proposals for our students' interests, obviously mediated by the teacher, and we know this, and that is something that we have learned in these 18 years of work. We know and we are fully aware of the role to be played by the teacher in the classroom with or without AI, with or without technology. And from that perspective, we don't have too many certainties for the future. We need to continue assessing implemented pilot programs, including the teacher's opinion about this topic. There has been a lot of exchanges about this. We need to focus on the certainties that we have. I think that we need to consider the fact of making some changes. If we achieve to change this in 1-2 percentage points, we can consider ourselves successful. We need to have a broad approach to this, including assessment, research, implementation of products that we can escalate. That would be the current situation today. And I believe that one of the strengths that we have is this step-by-step approach. Working together with ANEP, and we're being pretty cautious when it comes to deciding which is the next step to be taken. Okay, so thank you very much.
Varias convocatorias que lleguen desde ese lado.
Bueno, como cierre, porque
Okay, now we got to the last part. We're right on time. Let's talk about from diagnosis to collaborative action with the special presence of Gabriel Quirici and Roberto Porcecansky, Director of Fundación Ceibal. Gabriel Quirici is the National Director for Education of the Ministry of Education and Culture. So please, Gabriel and Roberto, come to the stage. Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's also my first time here at Ceibal. I have just joined the Fundación, invited by Fiorella and Roberto, and it's a challenge for me being here, but it's something I really enjoy. So, as the Director of Education of the Ministry, we believe this is the right perspective to address this topic. And this is one of the areas of knowledge production that we need to focus on. I love the idea of having the Fundación working on this topic, something that affects education and all the social factors connected to it. We know that they are used to working with different information analysis and processing tools. And also that they have all the experience connected to educational centers and schools. So it's great that we can generate knowledge and disseminate all these results. And this will help us to create better policies. It's not only about promoting research and development and the generation of knowledge. It's something that we can see from our perspective, that CEVAL generates a lot of knowledge. And something that I find amazing is that they export knowledge, right? And especially in education, where we are implementing all the theories coming from abroad, right? But we are a small country, that we have influences from different countries. But sometimes the agendas are defined by some paradigms that may imply that, I don't know, everything from Finland is better. Finland has been leading this area, where they are focusing on meals, for instance. Remember that educational system was generated after the World War. So I think it's important to generate our own knowledge. So not only leading the area, but also generating our own content, being able to produce elements that are in a way typical of our country.
¿No? Y que nos...
I think this is something that we need to celebrate, and it's something that we need to take into account in education, trying to combine the analytical approach, all the critical issues, but always taking into account that education is transformational of the lives of our children at primary and secondary education. This is a service that contributes to the well-being of families, to the community, and to the teachers. So I believe that this project by the Fundación contributes to the whole country using these tools that are so popular nowadays. It also shows their commitment. And a reflection of this will be implemented in the different policies in the country. Thank you, Gabriel. I'm not complaining. I chose this lot, being the last speaker before lunch. And I like thinking about the fact that if I have nothing intelligent to say, I'd rather stay silent. So I will just wrap up by sharing my happiness. I'm very happy to be here after working with Annie, relaunching this fund so that it's more relevant. I'm happy to have all these people around us, and I love this possibility of having Fundación Annie and all the other partners playing a fundamental role in research in such a relevant topic. And research is represents one of the things that Fundación Ceibal is working on. Then I would like to thank everybody here, to thank Professor Whitley. Thank you very much for coming all the way. I would also like to thank Annie and Ceibal for providing support to these funds, to the committee of advisors, to the team of Fundación Ceibal for making this possible, to Marila Muñoz and Virginia Robano that have worked so hard. We're very happy with their work. And once again, as you have mentioned, we are interested in contributing with new approaches, new methodologies. So I would like to thank you all once again and to encourage you all to apply to the fund. We want to have as many people as possible. Thank you. Okay, cool. So thank you very much for being here, for sharing all this time with us in the promotion of attendance, and also for the launch of the Sexual Education Fund and Digital Inclusion. Those of you that are going to be with us in the afternoon will be waiting for you at 2 p.m. and it will be a pleasure to see you, all of you, again in 2026 with a new edition of the program. Thank you.